Hello, this is Scott Leopold with Cooperative Strategies, and I will be taking you through the attendance area options for the attendance area change process for Columbia Public Schools. This presentation is identical to the presentation that will be showed at the attendance area changes open houses on January 9th, 10th, and 11th. All materials in this presentation are also posted on the district website, and feel free to pause this presentation at any time to get a better look at any of the maps or tables. Let me first begin by reviewing the overall process. This was presented to the school board back in the early fall of 2018. We began with a plan for planning work session where we determined milestones and timelines for the entire process. The school board then developed some guiding principles for us to use to develop options. We then began to review data and performed school-by-school enrollment projections for a 10-year period. We then developed preliminary options internally using the school board guidelines as a framework. We then began the community transparency process, which included a series of focus group meetings which involved more than 50 community members, parents, and other individuals. These groups were used to refine the preliminary options which were developed into the finalized options, which you will see today. The community open houses are an opportunity for all community members to provide feedback on the options. This is a progressive process that picks up feedback as it goes and incorporates the community feedback into what will finally be presented to the board. The board will then have discussion and action on these items. This slide shows the preliminary projected enrollment and utilization for each school. This is based on the current boundaries and the capacity of each building. The capacity is defined by the district and does not include any modular or portable classrooms. The projected enrollment goes out 10 years and again is based on the current boundaries. The school is considered overutilized when it is over 100% of its capacity. So if we look at this chart, we can see that Gentry currently has an enrollment of 903 students with a capacity of 775 students. This utilization is projected to increase to 138% or 1,068 students by the 2028-29 school year. If we look at Jefferson, it currently has a capacity of 900 students, and in 2021, that capacity will change to 450 once the new STEAM program is implemented. Thus, the utilization goes from 77% to 79%, and then up to 160%, and then increasing to 171% with its current boundary. Again, this illustrates the need to be able to decrease the size of that boundary. Looking at Lang, Oakland, and Smithton, each of these schools are projected to have utilizations in the 80s and 90s. And if we look at West is currently at 91%, projected to increase to about 101% in the last 3 years of the projection. We don't show any utilization for the new middle school because the boundary for that has not been determined yet, and that's one of the goals of this process. If we look at the high schools, this illustrates the imbalance that we have currently. Currently, we're 84% at Battle, 83% at Hickman, and 111% utilized at Rockbridge. We do project an overall growth at the high school level, Battle going from 84% up into the 90s and then down to around 88%. Hickman from 83% up to 97%, and Rockbridge from 111% up to 158%. If we look at the high school utilization overall, it's at 92% today, projected to reach 102% by the 21-22 school year, and then 113% by the 28-29 school year. And so even if we do achieve a perfect balance between the three schools, we're going to be overutilized at every school. One other thing to consider is that we're only showing the capacity and the enrollment for the three schools that we have here, Battle, Hickman, and Rockbridge. There is additional capacity at the Career Center and Douglas, and the students that would be attending those programs are counted in the enrollment for these schools. And so there is a little bit of wiggle room as far as utilization at the high school level, but we still want to try to get some balance between the three schools. This map illustrates our current boundaries. The high school boundaries are denoted by the dark purple colors. The middle schools are the shaded background colors. And the red outline areas with the numbers in them refer to the planning units that we use in this process. The numbers in each planning unit are just an index number to be able to refer to the planning unit so that we can show the projected enrollment by planning unit. And again, our enrollment is projected by planning unit, not by school. And so during this process with the focus groups, we have the ability to reassign planning units to different schools and see what the immediate impact would be to utilization and socioeconomic balance. Here's a little bit more review. These are the guiding principles that we utilize in this process. These principles were developed by the school board. The attendance area should anticipate the future growth of neighborhoods. A walkable and bikeable school is important, but may not always be possible. The board recognizes the power of a school to create community. Accessibility for families is important. Volunteering and attending school functions are easier when the school is near. The attendance area seeks to reflect the composition of the Columbia Public School community. Consider the time students spend on a bus and distance traveled to and from school. Consider attendance area boundary lines that follow natural and man-made boundaries. And the last one, consider a transfer policy that allows 8th graders to remain at their previous school and policies that will allow siblings to remain. The last one is not really a guiding principle. It doesn't really impact how the options are development. It is more of an implementation guideline. One other consideration with this is that these are not prioritized in any way, and some of them are naturally opposed. And so as you go through the options, realize that some adhere better to some guidelines than others. And that's why your feedback is so important to this process. Just some key points before we go into the options. All of the data reflects live-in or resident population in each area. And this is CPS resident population. This does not include enrollment from any private or parochial schools. What this means is that if a student lives in a planning unit and attends a school other than he or she is zoned to, they're counted in that planning unit in which they reside. The capacity we have for Jefferson is set to 450 in the charts, but the real capacity is closer to 650. This is to allow for approximately 200 lottery seats. And so as we look at those options, you may see some of the other middle schools may be a little overutilized. This is okay because we would intend that those students would be drawn into the program at Jefferson to kind of balance off that overutilization via choice. Again, the projected enrollment at the high school is predicted to exceed the overall capacity, so we're not going to be able to get all of the high schools under 100%, but we're striving for balance between the schools. And again, we also have that additional capacity at the Career Center in Douglas that'll help out with that overutilization. As you review these options, keep in mind that we're here to make changes based on your feedback. These are not complete packages that committee members are voting for. They're here specifically for feedback. If you don't like the option, we'd like you to tell us, but we'd also like you to tell us why. What can we change about the option to make it more acceptable to you? Also keep in mind that components of these options may be combined or edited based on feedback before they go to the board for discussion and action. Again, it's very important that you provide as much detail as possible, and the online survey is tailored so that you can provide that detailed feedback. The next few slides I want to talk about just illustrate some concepts relative to the guidelines. Again, I have mentioned in some earlier slides that we're not going to be able to develop options that adhere perfectly to all of the guidelines because some of them are kind of diametrically opposed. And so these slides are just intended to just illustrate some of the demographic realities that we have in Columbia. The topic that kind of came up a lot in the focus groups was, hey, we'd like to see an option that shows perfect socioeconomic balance between all of the high schools. And so that's what this map shows. Right now, based on our current boundaries, which are shown in the thick, dark black outlines here, we're at 54% free and reduced at Battle, 32 at Hickman, and 24 at Rockbridge. Our overall average is 35%. Again, what this shows is this is just an example. It's not the only example of a perfect balance, but I think it's a good approximation of it. Hickman is in the red, Battle is in the green, and Rockbridge is in the blue. And so in this demonstration, you can see we'd have to have some unusual looking boundaries in order to get that utilization that we're looking for, and also that socioeconomic balance. You have to basically pull kids from the doorsteps of certain schools to other schools to be able to balance that socioeconomics. And so again, this is not an option, but I just wanted to show this as just kind of a model to show the community what it would have to look like if we wanted to adhere to that, having a boundary that 100% reflects the Columbia Public Schools community as a whole. Our next map, this is a closest school analysis. What this is we just plug in the school locations and we use the road network and we have the computer model for us what the boundaries would look like if every student attended his or her closest geographic school. And so, this map shows us the boundaries. And so this would be the west boundary. This would be the Smithton boundary in purple. The new boundary for the new middle school would be down here in the kind of teal color, Gentry in the burgundy, Jefferson in the green, Oakland would be in the brown, and Lang would be in the tan. And so again, this is just an illustration. It's not an option. This chart shows us our comparison of our current utilization versus the projected utilization. Gentry would be at 101%, Jefferson at 132%, Lang 63%, Oakland 120%, Smithton 81%, West 73%, and the new middle school would be 63%. And so again, this just shows what it would look like and the imbalance that we would have if everybody attended his or her closest geographic school. Here is the same exercise, but for high schools. As you can see here, Battle would be at 41%, Hickman at 124%, and Rockbridge at 105%. And so Hickman, the boundary would be in the blue, Rockbridge in the green, and Battle in that brown color. Again, this is not an option. This is just showing what the utilization would look like at each school if every student attended his or her closest school. Now we will begin the options portion of this presentation. So we have 4 options to go through. They're all different. They adhere to the guidelines differently. I want to be very clear that this is not a vote. We're not looking for a vote up or down by the community for each of the options. We're looking for constructive, detailed feedback around the options. And also, these aren't complete packages. We may take pieces of these and put them together based on feedback. And that survey that we're going to release is designed to collect feedback around the options as a whole and also the component parts. And as I go through this presentation, please don't try to zoom in on the video or anything. It's going to be difficult to see street names because of the nature of the presentation. We do have a companion school locator that is available on the district website, which will return potential school zones by option based on an input address. And so you'll be able to input your address and find out which school you'd be assigned to by each of the options. Okay, we'll begin with option 1. We'll go through these options, middle school first and then high school for each option. These are the current boundaries, and so Smithton is in the pink, West in the blue, Jefferson in the orange, Gentry in the yellow, Lang in the green, and Oakland in the pink. Now I'm going to put on the middle school boundaries, and so the areas outlined in purple will be the Smithton zone, red would be the new middle school, yellow would be Gentry, Jefferson would be in the orange, Oakland in the pink, and there are no changes to Lang in this option. This option also maintains the 100% feeder patterns, and in this option, Jefferson would feed into Hickman. The western portion of the Hickman-Rockbridge boundary is maintained as well in this option. Now I faded back the current boundaries to get you a better look at what the changes look like and the areas that change. And so this area again would be all assigned to the new middle school. We have some areas over here moving into west, in this case from Jefferson, and then in this case from Smithton. We have an area here moving from west to Smithton, area moving from Jefferson to Oakland, west to Jefferson, and then from Jefferson to Gentry. This shows us a little bit more detail, zoomed into the central area of the city. Again, you can see these change areas: west to Jefferson, Jefferson to Oakland, west to Smithton, Smithton to west, Jefferson to west, Jefferson to the new middle school, and also another section here, Jefferson to the new middle school, and then Jefferson to Gentry. So here's our current high school boundaries, and here's our boundaries for option 1. And now I'll fade back to color. Here's our boundaries for option 1 with the background faded back. And here's our change areas. As you can see, we have those areas that in Jefferson that would feed to Hickman, and those areas that were moved from Gentry into Smithton and west would feed into Hickman. We also have that one area that was moved from Jefferson into Oakland, would also feed into Battle. And so here's our detail here. You can see this area goes from Rockbridge to Hickman, also Jefferson feeding from Rockbridge to Hickman, and then Rockbridge to Battle over here. Here's our data associated with option 1. And so if we look at the overall enrollment and utilization, Gentry would go from 121% down to 106 and stay between 106 and 111% for the next 10 years. We do show overutilization there, but again, remember that we're going to have some additional capacity at Jefferson through that magnet program. And so the hope is that we could draw students off of those overutilized schools into that program. Moving on to Jefferson, Jefferson would be at 43% based on its boundary. And so that would leave a lot more than 200 seats than we had anticipated for that program. Lang would be relatively well utilized. Oakland, 109%, kind of leveling off around 100%. But again, we can hopefully draw that number down based on that choice program at Jefferson. Smithton and West, relatively well utilized. Again, we have some higher numbers towards the end of the projection. The new middle school would open at 82%. And then gently taper up to 108% and level off between 112 and 109%. Again, we'd be able to hopefully reduce that overutilization through the choice program at Jefferson. Looking at the high schools, at Rockbridge, we'd go from 116 down to 94, and then right back up. We have some relatively good balance up until about 24, 25, and then that growth at Rockbridge kicks in. Again, we're not going to get perfect balance at the high, we're not going to get perfect utilization at the high schools because of our overall capacity. But also remember that we do have some additional capacity at Douglas and the Career Center. Looking at our socioeconomics, our free and reduced lunch data, Gentry goes from 19 to 27, Jefferson from 41 to 60, Lang stays the same at 60, Oakland from 61 to 64, Smithton 35 staying the same, West going from 43 down to 37. The new middle school would open at 15%, and our overall middle school average is 41%. Some of the feedback that we got in the focus groups was that, hey, this number seems low for the new middle school, but it's one of those things of where the school is located and the students that are in close proximity to the school. Looking at the high schools, Battle would stay relatively the same, going from 54 to 55%, Hickman from 32 to 31, and Rockbridge would go from 24 down to 19. This table with the orange headers shows the number of students moving from and to each middle school. And then the high school, the purple table denotes the high schools. And so you can see the total number of students impacted in this scenario is around 715 at the middle school level and 382 at the high school level. I'd like to reiterate that these tables show immediate implementation. And so these numbers might be a little different based on how these changes are implemented. So if they're phased in over 3 or 4 years, these utilization numbers will have a more gentle change from year to year. Here's option 2. So we'll start with the current middle school boundaries, fade on the change areas, and then we'll fade back the color. So here you can see, here's the change areas. We start to pull some students from Gentry up into Smithton, from West into Smithton. Here's our new middle school boundary. We take this large kind of north central area out of Smithton and into West. Again, we have that same area here going from Jefferson to Oakland. We have this area here going from Lang to Oakland, and then we have an Oakland to Lang area over here. Here's the more zoomed in map of those change areas of kind of the central city. Again, Smithton to West, also this area up here is also Smithton to West. We have these areas right here that would go from West to Jefferson, Jefferson to Oakland, Lang to Oakland, Oakland to Lang, Jefferson to Gentry, 2 pieces here. We have some Jefferson to the new middle school over here, and then the majority of the new middle school would be formed from Gentry. Do have this small area here going from West to Smithton. Okay, here's option 2, the high school boundaries. So here's current, proposed changes, and now we'll fade back the color. And here's our change areas. And so we've got over here on that west side corresponding to that middle school change from Gentry into Smithton. We have this area also going to Hickman. We show Jefferson, the remaining boundary, feeding into Hickman. And then again, that area moving from Jefferson to Oakland would also feed into Battle. Here's our zoom in of the central core of the city. You can see, of course, we have that Jefferson area again moving from Rockbridge into Hickman, and then that area moving from Jefferson to Oakland, feeding from Rockbridge into Battle. Here's our data associated with option 2. And so again, you can see our utilization at Gentry goes from 121 down to 104%. It kind of maintains that level throughout the projection. Jefferson, a little bit more utilization in this option when compared to option 1, 69% and maintaining that level. Lang, a little overutilization and then hovering on right around 100. Oakland hits 104 one year, but again in the 90s. West, a little bit of underutilization here. The new middle school in this scenario opens at 97% and then goes all the way up to 121. And so this option puts a little bit more onus on Jefferson to be able to draw students away from the new middle school. Looking at the high schools in this option, Rockbridge goes from 116 down to 99 and then back up, it doesn't get back up to its current levels until 23-24, 24-25. And again reaches 133% in year 10. Again, we're not going to get every school under 100% because of the overall utilization at the high school level. Looking at our socioeconomics in this option, Gentry goes from 19 to 28, Jefferson 41 to 50, Lang 60 to 62, Oakland 61 to 60, Smithton goes from 35 down to 25, West from 43 to 53. And the new middle school opens at 13. Again, minor changes at Battle, minor changes at Hickman, and then Rockbridge goes from 24% down to 18%. Looking at our overall number of students impacted and from and to each school, and the orange table for the middle schools, and then in the purple table for the high schools. Moving on to option 3, here's our current middle school boundaries. Here's our changes, the new boundaries. Now we faded the color back for the current, and you can see the changes. And here's our change areas. This is a little different in this option. Options 1 and 2 did have that 100% feeder continuity from middle school to high school. In option 3, we do have one split. In this case, Jefferson would split between Hickman and Rockbridge. Going into the change area a little bit more, you can see again, we have some areas feeding into Smithton from Gentry, from West. We have that same central core area moving into West from Smithton. We have those same similar changes over here between Oakland and Lang. We have these areas over here going from Jefferson to Gentry. In this particular option, the new middle school is composed completely of students from Gentry. Here's our more detailed view of the central area of the city with our changes, again, from Jefferson to West, Smithton to West, West to Jefferson, Jefferson to Oakland, Lang to Oakland, Oakland to Lang, Jefferson to Gentry, our new middle school from Gentry. And then we have from Gentry to Smithton, Jefferson to Smithton, and from West to Smithton. Here's our high school boundaries currently. Here's the option 3 boundaries. As you can see, in this area we kind of maintain that current Rockbridge Hickman, and that's where we have that Jefferson split. So those areas that were moved to Jefferson from West would continue to feed to Hickman. These areas moved from Gentry up into Smithton would also go to Hickman. Fading back the color. Again, this results in some more minor high school changes. Again, this area in the western portion of the district here would move into Hickman. We kind of maintain the existing northern portion of the Rockbridge boundary, but we do have that one piece north of 70 that's currently going to Rockbridge going into Battle. Here's our detailed view again that northern portion north of 70 going from Rockbridge to Battle, and then those areas moving from Gentry into Smithton would also move into Hickman. Here's our data associated with option 3. So in this option, Gentry goes from 121% all the way down to 88 and stays in the low to mid 90s throughout the projection. Jefferson stays in the high 60s. Again, we have room for that magnet program there. Lang, 96 to 108 and then leveling out. Oakland, relatively balanced. We do have a little bit of overutilization at Smithton and Oakland towards the end of the projection, but again, we have that additional capacity at Jefferson to be able to draw those students away. Looking at the high schools, we've got a pretty good balance between the three of them up until probably 25, 26. That's when we start to surpass current levels that we're at today at Rockbridge. But we do shift some of that utilization in the near term from Rockbridge to Hickman. Looking at our overall socioeconomic balance, so Gentry goes from 19 to 30, Jefferson 41 to 50, Lang 60 to 62, Oakland 61 to 60, Smithton 35 to 25, West 43 or 43 to 48, and the new middle school would open at 6%. Looking at the high schools, Battle relatively unchanged, Hickman relatively unchanged, and Rockbridge would drop from 24% down to 20. Looking at our overall impact here, this shows again the students coming from each middle school to each middle school, and then in the purple we show those high school numbers as well. So here's option 4. Just a little bit of background before we start to get into option 4. Some of the feedback that we got from some of the focus groups is that our socioeconomic status kind of went the wrong way in options 1, 2, and 3, as in not towards the overall district-wide average. And so option 4 was developed based on a lot of comments that we got in the focus groups that try to develop some options that do try to do a better job at balancing socioeconomics, knowing full well that we're not going to be able to make it perfect, as kind of illustrated by that proof of concept map that we had earlier in the presentation. So here's our current middle school boundaries and our proposed boundaries. And so in this particular option, Lang and Oakland remain completely unchanged. Now we'll fade back the color. And here's our change areas. And so we've got a larger, more western area for the new middle school. It starts to pull kids from areas that are closer to Smithton. We have areas right here moving from Jefferson into West. We have that same area here moving from West into Smithton. And then we have a relatively small area here moving into Gentry from Jefferson. Here's our zoomed in view. And so we've got some areas from Smithton moving into the new middle school, areas from Jefferson moving into the new middle school, from Jefferson to West, Jefferson to Gentry, and then from West to Smithton. So here's our high school options with this, so our current boundaries, and then the proposed boundaries for this one. I think it's also important to point out that this option pretty much abandons the feeder patterns. We've got some splits kind of all over the place. The new middle school would split between Hickman and Rockbridge. Smithton would also split between Hickman and Rockbridge. Jefferson would split between Rockbridge and Battle. And Gentry would split between Rockbridge and Battle as well, kind of in this area over here. We do kind of have this large area that we would maintain as part of the existing Rockbridge boundary, but we'd also take in some areas from Smithton up here. So we'll fade back the color. And so these areas would move from Smithton to Rockbridge. These areas would actually move from Rockbridge to Battle. And then this area over here towards the west would move from Rockbridge to Hickman. And so there's some pretty significant high school movements in this option, kind of in an attempt to help balance the socioeconomic balance between all the high schools. Here's our zoomed in look at this. Again, Rockbridge to Hickman, Rockbridge to Battle, and then Hickman to Rockbridge. Here's our data associated with option 4. So you can see in this option we go from 117% to 121% down to 93% at Gentry. And overall, we've got a really good balance at the middle school level through 24-25. That's when we see a little bit of overutilization at West and the new middle school. Again, remember when we showed Jefferson at 100%, it's 100% of an artificially low 450. Remembering that our capacity in that building is actually 650. And so we'll have room in that building to be able to reduce some of the overutilization at some of these other schools. Looking at the high school, we've got a good balance in 2020-21 and maintain that good balance up through 23-24. And that's when we start to diverge with Rockbridge. Looking at our socioeconomics, Gentry from 19% to 20, Jefferson 41 to 58, Lang and Oakland and Smithton all stay relatively close. West goes from 43 down to 33, and the new middle school opens at 24%. Looking at the high schools, Battle we reduce from 54% down to 51. If you remember, options 1, 2, and 3 all increased a little bit at Battle. Hickman goes from 32 to 27, and Rockbridge from 24 up to 27. These tables again show our from each middle school to each middle school, the students that would be moving, and then we show from each high school to each high school. And so again, this is just to give you the numbers for option 4. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. This presentation, along with an online survey, will be posted on 12/20 and will remain online through the community open houses in January. As far as the format for the open houses go, the presentation that you will see at those open houses is identical to this one. We'll have that presentation kind of playing on repeat so that if anybody has not had a chance to go through the presentation at home online, they can do so at that meeting. We'll have large format boards of the options kind of posted around the rooms, and will be available for any questions that you may have. And you'll also be able to fill out the online survey. And so it's the same survey that you'll be able to fill out online. The surveys will be collected in the same format. They won't be weighted any differently. So those are opportunities for you to attend in person. If you have any specific questions you want to have answered, we can answer those in person at those meetings. And again, the dates and locations for those, we are on January 9th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Gentry Middle School cafeteria, the 10th from 6 to 8 in the Battle High School Media Center, and on the 11th from 1 to 3 in the Aslan boardroom. Thanks again, and thank you for viewing this presentation. We look forward to seeing your feedback.